And we're recording. Welcome, everybody, to the latest edition of the Scholar Gypsies. I have writer and author John Waters with me today, and we're going to be talking about the kind of presidential debacle that has been ongoing all summer, and most recently has seen the withdrawal of Jim Gavin's candidacy from the race to the Oris. So welcome, John.
Thank you very much, Jerry. Sudden times.
Yeah. What's your, if we take the whole picture of this presidential election? I think you once said to me that the presidential election is the dirtiest campaign of them all, and this one seems particularly dirty, but it also seems. It feels like a campaign that type of campaign I've never seen before. It's kind of bizarre and bonkers.
Yeah, it is. It's extraordinary, and it's extraordinarily kind of articulate about something in the country, in the culture, in the politics of a culture that I think we need to look at as well. When I said it was the dirtiest campaign, I didn't just mean Irish politics. It probably is the dirtiest campaign in the world. I mean, I think it's dirtier than the US presidency, which is saying a hell of a lot. And I kind of expected that. You get that. It seems to exist. You see, this is an interesting statement, Jerry, that Irish politics is decided now not on the ideas or the visions of any particular individual. It's their flaws that decide it. Mm-hmm. That's been ordained from some quarter. That the whole nature of it is inverted, because we know from our history that all great figures in history had many personal flaws, but those such people cannot get through now into the political system because one slip and they're out. And, no matter how much schadenfreude you might feel about that in relation to any particular individual, you got to stand back from it and ask yourself, is this a good way to deal with things? Is this a good system of, governance or politics that to be operating if you want a society, if you want a culture, if you want a country that is capable of throwing up its strongest candidates for the job that they will be required to do, which in many respects isn't about your private personal life at all. It's about your capacity to understand what needs to be done in the context of running the country. And I think that's a very important point that's kind of been missed here. I'm not saying that out of any kind of loyalty or leaning towards any particular candidate in this. I don't have any. I mean, I think that the last three candidates that we ended up with there last week, like, they're indistinguishable to me. They had no distinguishing features insofar as none of them was capable of articulating anything about this country that inspired me in any way. None of them was talking about the things that have actually happened in this country in the last 15 years, say, which are vitally important for understanding what's the state we're in and where we're going. None of them had anything to offer in that context. None of the candidates at all, I don't think, that I saw who actually entered the race or sought to be nominated had those qualities either. I'm not saying it's just those three. It's almost as if this election was happening in a complete kind of vacuum, totally removed from what's actually going on in the country, where it's been, invaded, it's been planted, it's been, medicated, it's been, intimidated, it's been turned into a totalitarian, quasi-republic, and nobody's talking about any of this. So it's like everything is normalized to some date prior to, I don't know, maybe 2004 or something like that. That's where this election seems to be positioned in history, in time, in the context of what's actually happened and what's going on in our country. So it's a weird one. It's also, emblematic of the country in a strange way, the chaos of it, the sense of absolute kind of meaninglessness, the sense of, filth that is emerging, the sense of all the candidates. It's not just Jim Gavin. Look at that scene in University Galway the other day. With Catherine Connolly sitting above at the top table, while a student asked her a question. His name happened to be Burke, so what? And she wouldn't answer him, even having sort of expounded on her commitment to free speech and so on for months and years. and she just sat there with a smirk on her face, and then allowed him to be taken out by a policeman.
Mm-hmm.
And she claims to be a Democrat. She claims to be a Democrat.
Yeah.
I mean,
But she's very much, of all the candidates, when all the candidate names that have been out there all summer, I've always felt she was the one that was going to probably win. And just she has that kind of energy of a Michael D. She's the same kind of energy of a Michael D. without being. You almost think she's alternative, but she really isn't. And I think that Burke episode brings that to the front. Do you know what I mean? As in front and center, that.
Oh, yeah. It was very telling, Gerry. I mean, because regardless of what her view, and I don't know what her view of, Enoch Burke's situation is. I haven't heard her speak about it. Maybe she has, maybe she hasn't. I don't know. I haven't heard it anyway. But regardless of that, I mean, she's a candidate for the presidency, but also she's articulate. It's,
Yeah, she's smart.
Yeah. So why couldn't she answer this lad straightforwardly and do herself some credit, regardless? If she said, well, I don't agree with Enoch Burke's stance, fine. Or I disagree. I disagree with the way he was treated. Great. Whatever it is. But just blanking the lad and behaving in that manner and then skedaddling in her little carry. Now, of course, we have to remember something, Gerry, that, in one sense, we might think that she's indicting herself really badly here. But and I know that those videos will not go anywhere near the mainstream of Irish life. They won't be shown on any mainstream channel, regardless of how this election goes. There is an implicit understanding about who are the good guys and who are not the good guys, and she's one of the good guys, and therefore she will be well treated by the purchased media at all times in this campaign. Jim Gavin, precisely because he wasn't in that category, it didn't get well treated, and he was put on trial by the Chief Justice of the RTE Court, Anya Lawler, who gave him a right good dressing down before more or less telling him, go home now and consider your position, Mr. Gavin. And the severity of her tone, Gerry, I think you'll agree, was very appropriate for the moment.
Yeah. Well, you see, I thought myself, when you've gone through as many presidential campaigns as I've seen, and you've seen more, is that, when the knives come out for a candidate, like they have done in previous campaigns, I thought, personally speaking, the political parties went to great trouble to have what they thought were uncontroversial candidates on the ballot paper, and Fianna Fáil went to the trouble of going for an outsider. Sinn Féin didn't put up anybody, and Fine Gael put up somebody. Is on the way out. She's not part of the future vision of Fine Gael. Just for this reason, is that they're terrified of putting their real ideas and real plans for Ireland in the body of a person to run for president, because I think the country will wholesale reject it. That has been my train of thought on this. But this election seems like, as curious and bananas as it is, it seems to be bringing out the filth of our political system, at every stop.
In 5.5 years, when we've seen political events which had the possibility of consequences for any of the participants. In other words, because that whole concept, which had to do with the role of the press, the media, as guardians on the public realm, and as a system of rendering accountable those in power over that realm. And for the last 5.5 years, that all of the media have been bought off under those headings, and therefore there have been no consequences for anybody, pretty much. I don't think, if you go back, has there been any serious consequences? Anybody who had to go went off their own volition without any pressure from the media. One time, what's happening now was quite commonplace, even in, the ordinary, quotidian activity of politics. But now it's back. But it's back, you see, because the people that are involved, or some of them at least, are outsiders to the system. They're not central to the operation of the government, which is essentially the same government we've had now for 15 years, practically. You know, I mean, they changed the nameplates over the door, but it doesn't matter. It's the same government. And that's kind of like, so the media are now back to doing what they used to do in the old days, which was like, you know, go after the politicians on an issue of ethics or of personal morality or whatever it would be. And that was part of the circus and the kind of, you know, the sport element of politics. But now it's back, but it's back in a very selective way. And I suspect what we're going to see now, Gerry, is that there'll be a cessation. An order will have gone out now, Gerry, in my view, that there's to be no further going after anybody, because the government needs this contest to come to an orderly conclusion. It needs, you know, these contest candidates to pretend to be battling it out for the next couple of weeks, and at the end of that, one or other of them will be elected, and that will be the best, the damage limitation outcome of this shambles. That's what they want, and I don't know if they care very much which of them it is, and it doesn't matter because they're indistinguishable. I mean, the only question in relation to the President of Ireland that is of any real relevance is this: is there any possibility that the President, when presented with a bill, any bill, which having read it, he or she decides, I'm not happy with that bill, therefore I'm going to call in the Council of State to discuss whether we should actually refer this to the Supreme Court? That's the sole power the President has in the first instance. There are other powers which arise from if, for example, the Oireachtas were to decide similarly about a bill that it needed to be referred to the people. They could actually vote that if I think they need a majority in both houses for that. And that would then go back to the President, who would have discretion about that, actually, incidentally, but he could then, or she could, refer to the people in a referendum. The powers of the President are limited to literally that, the meaningful ones. He can make speeches, but he actually has to get his speeches, or she has to get her speeches cleared by the government. People don't know these things. Now, the only real radical potential of, or what you would call disruptive, rather than radical, disruptive power that the President has is giving public interviews. For example, a president going on the Late Late Show, a live TV show, could actually say lots of things that might make the government uncomfortable before the government would have get a chance to veto it. That kind of thing. So that's really what the government has been afraid of in this campaign, and particularly in relation to Conor McGregor. McGregor was talking about, he didn't really, to be honest, and I don't think he read the Constitution. So he was under the impression, I think he was under the impression that he could basically refer bills directly to the people. He can't. It's a much more circuitous process, and it's almost like, you know, mathematically impossible that the President will ever end up in that situation. There's too many ifs and buts. It would almost need to be an issue of like overwhelming consensus in the public realm for that to actually happen. And it's not going to happen. So really, all you have is really the kind of discretion that Carol O'Dowley exercised many years ago when he referred a bill to the Supreme Court, and he was attacked by a blue shirt minister, and he resigned as a result of that in protection of the office as he saw it, because he said this is a right of the President to do this, and the government has no right to interfere or to comment on that aspect of it. And he was right about that. And he was a very principled man, and he was, of course, a former, I think, Chief Justice. So he was a very elevated guy to be dealing with these matters. But the powers are very limited, and therefore, you know, really, it's a beauty competition, isn't it? but not in the normal sense, Gerry. I hasten to add.
Has a recent president referred a bill to the Supreme Court?
It has happened once or twice. Yeah, it doesn't happen very often. I don't know I can't think of one. I would have expected the present incumbent, President Higgins, to have referred a certain bill which was put before him back in July of 2021, which really introduced health apartheid into Irish life, which would have meant that if you had a particular injection, then you would be able to go where you liked in Irish society. Whereas if you didn't have that injection, you couldn't go to the cinema, you couldn't have you go to a cafe, a restaurant, etc., etc. I would have thought that President Higgins, as being a personal friend of Archbishop Desmond Tutu of South Africa, who at the time was still alive, actually, he didn't die until the following December. I thought that president would have really been saying, oh my goodness, under no circumstances am I signing this fascistic mechanism into Irish law. I will certainly call in the Council of State and I will prevail upon them with my utmost rhetorical skills to ensure that this is referred to the Supreme Court. And I would be urging the Supreme Court, insofar as I have that discretionary power, to see the matter in the same fashion. However, he signed the bill without question. And afterwards, Gerry, he then complained that the government was giving him too many bills to sign and he hadn't time to read them all. Now, Gerry, that's a terrible advice. That's a terrible thing for a president to admit to, because you know what it means. You know what the implications of that are, Gerry. If he is signing bills without signing them, that is an impeachable offence, and he should have been taken out immediately.
Yeah. Well, he'd also have to give up his weekly chats with Tommy Tiernan to do that.
Well, of course. Yeah.
But I suppose this, you've brought up a load of, you brought up a load of things there. And I suppose one of the things, just going back to Simeon Burke, I think there's 2 points to note on that interaction with Catherine Connolly, is that in the aftermath, it turns out that, he's training to be a barrister, but has had a great difficulty getting to devil with a barrister. And Maria Steen's a relation, I don't know if it is a sister of Maria Steen, has offered him that support. And the other thing with question from a student, Simeon Burke was just voted onto the council of the Student Union of University Galway. So I'm
not certain. Was it definitely Simeon? I don't know if it was. I think it might have been another. Was it Elijah? I don't know. I can't remember now. But I don't know them that well, other than Enoch, to see. But yeah, I heard these facts, and I think that that's a very interesting development, and it shows that a new alliance being forged there that is most interesting, and you can see why that would be the case in some regards, But yeah, it's. You see, ultimately, I suppose you're touching on the ultimate reason for her behaviour, which is that she regarded the Burkes as her ideological enemies, and therefore refused to speak to them. But, even Mary Robinson was at great pains to say that she was a bridge builder, that it was about coaxing each part of Ireland to come together and to see things, in certain things in a common way, and she was very successful. That was a very successful strategy for her, rightly or wrongly. I don't think she necessarily meant it. I don't think she was sincere about it, certainly not. But that was her line, at least. I mean, it just shows you that how much things have changed, that somebody can actually adopt a stance like that in full public view, and not feel that they're going to damage their chances of winning the election.
Yeah. But one of the other points you brought up there, John, as well, is that, this idea, and I feel you're 100% correct, is that the media now are in a situation where they have to prop up both candidates, because for the next 3 weeks, this threatens to the loss of another candidate, and there's heavy pressure on, as apologies for the earlier mistake, on Heather Humphreys on something, to do with an issue in the similar vein to what nobbled Jim Gavin in the end, this $3,500 owed to a tenant, but something along those lines. But that in itself is has the potential to introduce more problems, because I think the public I think the public are very much aware that Irish politics now is actually a sham. Like as much, like I think everyday people understand this now, and it's been shown that way during the course of this overall presidential campaign. And I think even if the media do adapt this kind of light touch regulation for the last 3 weeks, that in itself could cause problems.
Yes. Well, I think that, you see, that's exactly the point, Gerry, I think, about this, that this campaign, what it really is about in this, all of this shambolic carry on, and the extraordinary behaviour of the Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil leaders in regard to banning their representatives from supporting or nominating any candidate that wasn't a member of the Uni Party. That was really, I think, extraordinary. Because of course that isn't the function of those kind of nominatory procedures. Their sole purpose is really a kind of gatekeeping to ensure that the complete, flaky ones don't get through, and that you get a reasonably ordered campaign. It's a little bit like, the ex parte procedure at the beginning of some legal cases, where you have one party alone going before a single judge, who then looks at the papers, and he literally, or she literally no more than looks at them, to ensure that they're not made out in green biro, for example, and that they're moderately well, argued. And most of the time they look at them and they don't even read the whole lot. They just get out the stamp and hit it, or else they say, no, this is nonsense. It's gone. So the procedures are, the reason you have county councils having those powers is not to give them enormous power in deciding the identity of the future president of Ireland. It is in order to basically have some kind of, borderline that they have to cross in order to go in to this very momentous contest. Now, in the last couple of months, we've been watching the mainstream. Essentially, what they're doing is protecting their coup. And by their coup, I mean basically the arrangement between the two major parties to run this country for as long as they can, according to a certain set of protocols and policies, and that this must continue. That is the imperative of this of all times, and so they can't afford to have any disruptive force getting into the system. And even like a president like McGregor would be absolutely anathema to them, because he would be a loose cannon from their point of view, causing daily disruption and antagonism, and no doubt he would, and getting a lot of publicity internationally. That's the last thing they wanted. And having done that then in relation to McGregor and driven him out, they then decided that, well, we might as well, while we're at it, clean up the rest of them as well. So we basically put a block on everybody. And that's what happened. That never happened before, Gerry. I mean, we had loads of candidates in the last few presidential elections. A very colourful contest, very dirty contest too, but very colourful, and lots of different personalities, of all kinds, from all kinds of walks of life. And that made it very interesting for people. Now it's back to really what it was in the days of Dev and Tom O'Higgins, two guys slugging it out, two old, stagers slugging it out for the big prize. And that's something like what's going on here, except this time it's two women. It doesn't make any difference. But, I heard couple of very interesting kind of stories or rumors in the last 24 hours. One is that the rumor is that, and of course it may be only a rumor, that Owen Harris has been drafted in to tutor Heather Humphreys. If you remember, he was very central to the election of Mary Robinson way back. I've often spoken about this because he really was. He basically got her elected with his understanding of the semiotics of electioneering, the question of how she looked, how she spoke, how she stood, all those things, and also what tactically she should do. And I famously told about the time of when she had been asked by Hot Press to be interviewed during the campaign, and the Labour Party said absolutely not. No, and they'll be asking her about her sex life and about her drug habits and whatnot. We can't be having that. And Harris, when he was asked, he says, "You have to get blood on the blouse."
Yeah,
Yeah,
and I think Harris was also behind David Trimble for a certain
he
while.
was. He
As far as
was.
he, I
Harris
think
is.
I think he
Harris is
came
a
up.
fun.
Go on,
Sorry,
sorry.
Harris is a phenomenally brilliant man in that territory. Absolutely extraordinary. He's understanding of the whole. Uh, I mean, the Labour Party claimed that they had got Mary Robinson elected. Not a chance. The Labour Party are duds in that area. Harris is way ahead of everybody. So I would be with him if it is true that he is working for or with Heather Humphreys. I think you'll be seeing a very different Heather Humphreys before the weekend.
Well, we know Harris's kind of animosity towards the Shinners, so I'd say he'd be trying to
Oh
trying
yeah.
to make links between Catherine Connolly and Sinn Féin now,
Oh
and
yes.
going forward, I suppose one of the big characters of this campaign has been Maria Steen, and her, kneecapping at the last minute, and you're talking about a big figure in the political scene in Harris. We had another in Michael McDowell, and I think in the moment of his decision not to back the candidate, to allow Steen's name to go forward, it's a microcosm for me of why he's a political failure. For such a brilliant, you talk about Harris, whatever you might say about all these characters, you say they're brilliant men, intellectually, but McDowell has been, bar a few highlights, last year's referenda being one, he just doesn't have the ability to do the right thing, make the right decision at the right time. I feel. How did you view that whole situation?
Yeah, I agree. I there's different elements to this here, because I think first of all you have to say about his behaviour towards Maria Steen was extraordinarily petty, really, really petty, and it cast him in a very bad light. Such a bad light, I think, that he's more or less finished now. He's lost all credibility, really, and that's a great pity, because he did have some strong points. He's a complex character over time. I've known him going back, not personally, but we have been at loggerheads in different contexts, and we never got on. But I had a kind of a snaking regard for him in a way, because he was quite a bright guy, and very clear in his outlook. And when he made a decision, he did it, and he wasn't a messer, or a waffler, as Bertie might have said. But I think what happened here, Gerry, was that he belatedly regretted not himself putting his own name forward. I think he had an expectation that he might actually be given the nod by the main parties, and that he wouldn't have to go through get his hands dirty in a campaign. And then that didn't happen, so he decided that he wasn't going to run. And then when Maria Steen put her name forward, he realised, just thinking about it, that she had a chance of winning. And that was so dismaying to him that he decided, well, I won't nominate her. And then she won't even get through, because it's pure jealousy. It would be pure jealousy, I think, on his part. He is that kind of guy. I'm sorry to say, he was always like that. If you go back and look at his early time as a liberal, a very, very strident liberal type of guy, sneery, and I remember there was a famous clip going around there last year about him slagging off myself and Desmond Fennell, for our views and so on. He was very intolerant, but then he kind of mellowed out, and he became a very, very reflective kind of elder lemon of Irish politics, and really was immersive in that guise. And he spoiled it now very badly. But I think one of the reasons may be that, on the dinner party circuit of D4, that stuff wouldn't have gone down well. His hugger-mugger with, hanging out with Maria Steen and in those referendum campaigns and so on, that wouldn't have gone down well around Ranelagh, and that's probably at the heart of where he is. And like in a lot of respects, Gerry, I've noticed this very strongly. You can only take independence unless you're extraordinarily strong of spirit and mind. You can only ever take strong positions in the public realm if you're kind of a complete loner.
Yeah.
Where you're not effective, you're not part of any club, you're not part of any tribe, you're not part of any group that will kind of disapprove of you. And I think that might be a big factor here. But I think he did come across in the last 2 years as a very measured, intelligent, and a moderate-minded guy, you know. And I actually said, you know, that he had the potential to save Ireland if we could have found a way of getting him into the position of Taoiseach. President,
well,
not so
yeah,
much,
yeah.
you know.
Like, you know, there's the kind of the contrast between his hugely successful career as a barrister, like
Yeah,
over the last generation, with his political career, which has not been at all, you know,
it's mixed. It's
it's
mixed.
it's mixed. It's not anywhere in the same realm of his success in his professional life.
But you
And
know, Jerry, yeah, but you know, Jerry, I think that was a measure of his strength as a figure of authority, moral authority, because it was because he often did things that were unpopular with his own voters. He turned them off, you know, and you know, his strong stance against mass migration way back when nobody else was doing it. Way back, we're talking over 20 years ago, when he brought in the Anchor Baby referendum and all that. And I was on the other side in that, so I'm in a good position in a certain sense to say this, that, you know, he showed great foresight in that. I mean, he saw things that I didn't see at that time. Maybe because he was privy to seeing patterns within the system that I had and wasn't privy to. But he really did he stood out. And again, I would say that was definitely the kind of thing at the time.
But isn't that a curiosity, John, to find that he had that foresight? What that referendum was, what, nearly 20 years ago now. Yet when we're swamped with what he was worried about back then, he has very little to say. Like, he was certainly not at the forefront of this, we'll say, in 22.
Well,
early
yeah, but
23.
what happened in between? Was it 2007 when he lost his seat? I think it was.
Yeah.
And that was a real body blow to him, like, you know, because that probably was consequential of his behavior on the mass migration issue, because, you know, the kinds of people who would be voting for him would be complete gobshites in that context. They wouldn't have any understanding of what he was talking about, because all they want to do is virtue signaling. This is a symptom of the whole problem that we see, you know, about liberalism. Liberalism, you know, is essentially a belief system whereby the practitioners of it are able to spout and spout and spout, but never suffer the consequences of their own opinions. And that would be exactly the kind of constituency that Michael McDowell was elected by. And when, therefore, he went the other way, they would have been appalled, Jerry, you know, really terrible. You know, the Mixer, he's a good guy. He's a good guy, you know, I like it. He's a good guy. But, you know, really, it's over the top, you know, this racism business, I'm sorry to say, you
know. Where does the decision with, you know, I'm just thinking now about Micheál Martin. You know, in the old system, he's made even 10 years ago, he's made such a catastrophic mistake with Jim Gavin, as things have turned out, because he was the one pushing his candidacy over. Was it Billy Kelleher, one of the Fianna Fáil MEPs?
Yeah. Another dud.
Like, well, another dud, but in the old kind of system, Micheál Martin's resignation should be coming 5 minutes after Jim Gavin pulled out.
This is an interesting question, and this could be more complicated than I'm aware of, because there's something I'm hearing on the breeze, but I can't. Yeah. I haven't had time to look into it. There's something about a video that they're talking about now online that apparently indicts Martin pretty seriously in this whole matter. It may have to do, I don't know, it may have to do with the fact that there is a rumor also that Martin was already told about this little business of the 3,300 quid.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's another interesting little tidbit that I've heard, which is really damning of Jim Gavin, but not in the way that we've been talking about. Damning of his intelligence. Because apparently the tenant in question, to whom this money was owed, is actually the deputy editor of a national newspaper. Now, Jerry, if that's true, it shows that Jim Gavin's judgment is so suspect, and his capacity to anticipate events so absolutely, obsolete, dead, dodod, that we're safer that he is not going to be president. Much safer. Now, if Martin knew about this, you would imagine the normal course of events, and I stress those words, he would go. It's the old thing about Alistair Campbell, about Alistair Campbell's principle that if a politician was in trouble in the media, couldn't get it off the front pages by the weekend, he was toast. But as I said, in the core normative events of modern politics in Ireland, since the pandemic, that hasn't obtained. There have been no consequences for anybody. They've been murdering people left, right, and centre, and nobody's walked the plank. Literally. And they've been, doing all kinds of things with hate speech laws. There's every sort of thing that 20 years ago would have caused any of those guys to be regarded as completely unsuited to public life, have been done with total impunity for 5.5 years. So then you say, well, okay, what will be different here? Well, it depends. See, they don't any longer, the media no longer need to get Jim Gavin off for whatever reason they might want to get him off the list, the ticket, right? So they don't need to take Don Martin. And the point of it is the imperative of the coup do not require, far from requiring Martin to go, they require Martin for his stupidity and his obedience.
But what I would have thought, if there was any core decency in the Fianna Fáil party, and my own feeling would be that there are quite a number, that's a party that has, maybe 40-50% of the old school type of politician, and while promoting the Jack Chambers of the world up to high office, who are in a different boat.
Yeah.
If they like, I know for a fact that even with a clean slate Jim Gavin, pristine, no controversy, there was a big cohort of that party that wanted one of their own running. So I would have thought, obviously the media want to keep the likes of Simon Harris and Micheál Martin in power in perpetuity, because they basically will parrot any agenda, the agendas that are being pushed through the Irish media.
Well, you see, I think that analysis, Gerry, would have been very, very appropriate and apropos maybe 10 years ago. But now there's no such thing, in my view, as a grassroots mentality in parliamentary politics. It doesn't matter. They don't care. The system doesn't care what those guys think. They're cannon fodder. They're just making up numbers. We saw that when the calls that came through to Willie O'D and somebody else about the possibility that they were going to nominate Maria Steen. And they were told in no uncertain terms, no, you're not doing that. And they didn't. Now, so this means that the old, see, you got to remember, like, I don't know how they succeeded in doing this, but they basically cut all the wires between the out there grassroots of Fianna Fáil, out there in the Commons and all the rest. They lost all power in the last 5 years. They don't have any power at all, zero. And the guys who they send up to the Dáil don't have much power either, unless they get into the cabinet. And then they have only the power of obeying what the orders are that come down from wherever they come down from. And as a result, so unless it is the case that the powers be, I call it the Combine, which is the all-powerful entity that is running all this show, and it is. None of this is organic. It's been run from on high. Only if those guys want shot of Martin, will Martin walk. That's the only reason. If he does, it'll be because they don't want him anymore. In the same way they ceased to want Radcreep, and he walked. But Martin won't be walking anywhere unless it is required of him by those people, by those powers. And I don't think they want shot of him, because they're never going to get anybody as compliant, as unthinking, as ignorant, and as obedient as Micheál Martin. I don't know anybody, not even Jack Chambers, you could say. He might have somewhere about his person some iota of principle, and that would never do.
No. Well, Jack Chambers is the same kind of identikit, even though they're different parties, to Simon Harris. These are guys who came straight out of the education system into politics with no experience of work, life, anything other than their education and now politics. So
I think, Gerry, if you would, no offense, but whenever you use the word education, you should really go like this. Really. Because they go to a place called university or whatever, but really, come on, they don't learn anything there.
Well, now that's a good segue into your own. You say that now, so I have to. That's a good segue into your own reintroduction to the Irish higher education system.
Yes,
you've decided to, as it were, belatedly join the fray in Sligo IT to do a creative. Masters in creative
creative practice. Yeah. Well, you see,
how have you found that experience? Like going, it's like going into the belly of the beast.
So far, so good. So far, so it's quite challenging in the sense it's quite hard work. I'm here. I am at 70 years of age, and I'm busier than I've ever been. And I'm now back in school as well. But no, just to say what my motivation was. I mean, my motivations was several-fold. I mean, one was that, as I say, I was hitting 70. I want to keep the old brain in full, proper functioning order. I want to be doing things that are challenging me a little bit. But moreover, I started out way back years ago and 30 years ago, I was writing plays, and I had quite a bit of success. I got a couple of awards for plays I did. I wrote plays. I had a couple of plays staged in Dublin, and I used to write plays for the BBC, for Radio 3 and Radio 4. And so I stopped because for personal reasons, really to do with having a child and having to kind of knuckle down and just, keep the bills paid. And so my plan that time was to quit journalism and just do that in some kind of full-time capacity, and that didn't prove possible. But I lost, so I kind of got out of the habit. And you see, with the nature of something like that, Gerry, let's call it whatever it is, playwriting, what would you call it? It's a form of a craft, But in the same way, it's like songwriting. I used to do songwriting as well. And songwriting is a really good analogy because the two are similar, but it's easier to explain with songwriting. That when you're going about the place, as a songwriter, you're constantly listening for things that might end up in songs. Ideas or lines or whatever, and you jot them down, and you're constantly writing songs, and most of them never come to anything. So the same is true of playwriting, and I wanted basically to get back in that zone in a way, because you got to be realistic, Gerry. I'm cancelled from every basically public place. Interesting that I'm in ATU. I can't believe it, really, but there's no chance of me getting a play on in Ireland. There's no chance of me being allowed to publish a book or play probably in Ireland, and so on. So I kind of need some way of bringing myself into that frame of mind, because I have this sense that, having written about what's been going on in the country for 5 years now, it's on my Substack, literally to the week almost. I would like to actually write about it in a different sort of idiom, because I think that a play, maybe a movie, although that's a different discipline. I have written scripts for movies, not successfully, I'm afraid to say, but they're successful as far as they were, just didn't get made, and there's a big queue there,
Well, I think one of the things there on that, and the different, whatever the future holds or whatever you might want to build for the future, I think one of the things is there's a certain onus on, I'd be anti-establishment. So like whether they're on anything I've seen in the resistance movement, I've ended up resisting, and anything obviously in mainstream politics. I think there's a part of that is the spaces for these things need to be built. Like, you were saying there, you would never get a play, and you're probably 100% correct. I can't see a John Waters play being
not while I'm alive, Gerry.
Not while you're alive. But I think the part of that is, people talk about, they often criticize, we both write, and they'll often criticize, well, what's your solution? Like, and I suppose this, other than that, is one of the things I would have thought that people need to maybe think about is not having so much, given so much credence to getting into the abbeys, getting into the mainstream media, getting into whatever, is that actually the spaces for these new things need to be created too. So the creations need the spaces to be created as well, like for the future.
So true, Jerry. It's very interesting. I you see, when I think of somebody like, say, like a great hero of mine, Václav Havel, who was primarily a playwright, and he became the leader of the resistance in Czechoslovakia in the 70s, and he was a hugely strong moral leader, and his plays were kind of absurdist, satirical, and somewhat obtuse. Like so, he could actually put on in small enough theaters plays that were actually, clipping the ear off the communist regime without them knowing it. But his audience knew it, and that was a very effective way of fighting those battles. Now, I don't know if that's possible. I would like to try it. One of the things I would like to try. But again, I think, my only way of getting a play put on in Dublin is if I go through via Manhattan or somewhere. But that's what. But your point is very good. And I'm actually in the moment reading a book, which is very interesting. It's a book written by a guy called Gerard Whelan about something that happened back in Ireland in the theatre in the 1950s, 1957, when a theatre called the Pike was basically closed down as a result of government intervention in relation to a play called The Rose Tattoo, written by Tennessee Williams, which they claimed was obscene and so on and so on. And the people who ran the theatre were absolutely bankrupted and so on, even though they won the case in the end. And it wasn't found to be in any way obscene, which it wasn't, because the booklet was selling in wherever, Easton's or wherever the equivalent was at the time. But it's a very interesting book about that whole sector, that when you think about it, Dublin was kind of alive with little theatres where you would have 60 or 70 people going in there and watching all kinds of plays which were in their different ways subversive of what, church rule or political rule or Dev or McQuaid or whatever it was. And that was something that unfolded from that. But I'm finding the book, I'm not completely through it, I'm really finding it interesting. A very good book. Well, it's called Spiked, and it's really interesting if people can get their hands on it. It's well worth reading, very in terms of understanding, because very often what you find on these issues, Jerry, in relation to past, what we might call totalitarianisms, mini totalitarianisms, if there were many, what we find is a divide between people who either say they happened more than they actually did, or people who say they didn't happen at all. And nobody really actually, that in a certain sense, they did happen, but sometimes it was a little bit more subtle than we remember. And I think that's a very important aspect of, that when we look back at our history. And the other thing about this is this, that as I'm reading the book, Jerry, the thought that keeps recurring to me is that the people who would be most outraged by this story to read it or hear about it now, 60 years later, 60 odd years later, nearly 70, they will be the first ones to deny what's happening in Ireland at this moment, and that the same things are being done to people now as were done to the people in Spike. The cancellation, the lawfare, the pursuit of people and the hounding of people out of their jobs. All of this is happening now. And the very people who would want to talk about the Rose Tattoo and the Pike Theatre in 1957 and say how terrible it was, they're the very ones who say, oh yeah, what about it? Yeah, serves them right. Far right.
Well, you see, the thing for me it would be is that, and this is all to do with environment at the base level, that unless the environment of the country changes, nothing on the political front can change, in a sense. Do you know what I mean? Now, so I suppose where there might be hope in that is everybody can be part of creating a new environment in their own tin pot way. And one of the questions I wanted to ask you about you going back into the kind of, the formal education system is, what's your observance been of the youth, the young population that you've come across, or is it too early to tell? Do they have an interest in like things like the Irish presidential election? Are they? Do they?
No, nothing like we had. Nothing. There's nothing like that. They live in a parallel world to all that. That's my strong sense, and that's kind of as I would have expected it, because I have a daughter as well, and she would have been like that. All her friends would have been like that, growing up. Even no matter how much I might talk about these things, it wouldn't really acquire any relevance for them, rightly or wrongly. It's hard to blame them actually when you look at this shambles that's going on now. But no, I would say, yeah, it is too early for me to make any kind of judgment call about kids. They're very nice kids, a lot of them, and they're you kind of know that some of them have been kind of indoctrinated very heavily, and that's inevitable, I suppose. But they're decent kids, and it's very interesting. I find it really interesting. The one thing I would say though is that it's very noticeable that there are certain territories out of bounds, really, or they're not so much out of bounds, but they're just not talked about. There's a tacit understanding if you don't mention certain things in certain ways, and we know what they are, And so you see, that brings me back to the point I was going to make about what you said there about, is there any chance that we might actually uncover this? Well, no, except we run out of money, Gerry. Money is the real central factor in all this, because it is money that is buying all the obedience, and money that is buying all the corruption, and money that is buying all the everything in the political system, and in the theatrical system, and in the publishing system, and in whatever system. That it is money that decides who gets to do what if they do. And when there is no money, people, it is money who puts all the activists onto the street. George Soros, flooded the market with activists, Antifa, BLM, by paying them very well to cause disruption. They were brought over to Seattle or, Genoa or somewhere like that, and trained up to how to disrupt meetings, what to do. First thing, you get control of the microphone, so on. How you intimidate hotel managers to make sure that they capitulate your demand that they cancel an event. All this kind of thing. How you put a picket on a meeting. All that. This is all. You see, and again.
Well, this is why I think the environment is the most important. The way I'm listening to what you said there now is they have all the tools to control the current environments. So the hotels, the theaters, the Dáil, the offices of state, and this is where I would be looking at, almost saying, well, let them have it. In the meantime, we have to, and I say we as a thought bubble, we need to create almost a parallel environment that where that, in a sense, we can gatekeep. This whole past 5 years, from maybe my perspective, is trying to get past gatekeepers.
Yes, Gerry, but that was precisely the meaning of what happened in relation to, and you know this from your own experiences of Tuatha Dé Danann, Misha that was perceived as being a danger to the regime and to the coup for precisely those reasons, because it was touching the nerve, the absolutely central nerve of Irish sensibility, potentially. And by doing so, it was at risk of actually starting an explosion that they wouldn't be able to put down, or might not be able to put down. And I think that's the problem there. Like, as soon as you set up a theatre company, for example, and you find a little building somewhere in Dublin or wherever, you'll find those blue hairs will be outside with their placards and shouting and screaming and shouting obscenities and throwing things, and the cops will then come to keep the peace, and then they will stand by watching all this happen until somebody retaliates and they will arrest them, and then the next day far right activists arrested outside theatre. And that's what they want, so there's nothing guaranteed here. I mean, that's the bizarre thing. Just reading this book, it's very interesting in that respect, because obviously, if you were in the theatre sector in those years, it was a pretty fragile situation to be in, very precarious, both economically, financially, in the context of the people who are investing their money in putting on plays, and maintaining theatres, but also in the context of doing your job as an actor or whatever. It was very uncertain. You could find the cops waiting for you when you arrived for work, and telling you have to go home now. You were not allowed to put on the play tonight. Now, in the case of the Pike one, they did, in the face of all that intimidation, they kept the play going to the end of its run. To their great credit. It's a tremendous story, actually. It would make a great movie. But of course, the problem is with it now, it would be distorted. Because ultimately, as it turns out, as far as I can gather, and I haven't finished the book now, even though McQuaid, the Archbishop of Dublin, was kind of flitting around the outside of it, he wasn't the one who actually, it was more of a political initiative. It's almost like, I would say, an exercise in mind reading by the political establishment of the ecclesiastical establishment. And you get all that kind of stuff now as well, like in the terms of, that essentially our government is a mind-reading government. They know what the powers outside require.
And they also know, given AI and the technology that's available, they know the exact temperature of the country at every moment of the day, I would say.
Yeah, and they know if they can lie, if they can build an edifice of lies, a pseudo reality, which they have, that they can basically move about around that once they know where it is, once they know where its limits are, and don't make mistakes of blundering outside of that or saying things that might get in, or allowing things into it that might cause a rupture. Like, for example, if maybe that clip of Catherine Connolly in the university in Galway were to go mainstream, it might have an effect on people, who have a certain sympathy towards Enoch Burke and so on.
Yeah, so and you were right there earlier, because I was mixing up. Elijah is the Burke that's in that made the statement, and Simeon is the barrister who's outside of it now. But Elijah, but I suppose one of the hopeful things there is that there's a family, but there's a kid also who wears his identity on his sleeve, pro-life, and yet has been elected to the student council, even though it might seem like a small thing. Is that it lead me to wonder, will there be a vicious reaction in the student population at some point to all this overt kind of totalitarianism it's almost invisible.
See, this is really where the kind of cognitive dissonance becomes visible. Because, you see, what is going on now in Ireland is completely against the grain of what you would normatively have been expecting from young people in relation to the positions they're taking. That, you see, the imperative, that's why woke nothing is organic. So woke was introduced in about 2011-12 for precisely this reason, to draw all the young people to itself and therefore create a sense that this is the progressive agenda and this is where we are. And that brought them into line with the governments of the West, right? But that isn't what then when you see somebody like Enoch Burke, and you see, it's the fact that he's a very strong Christian, slightly colours it, but not all that much. He's still, when they look at him, a man of enormous integrity. And he's been done down by power. And he's been locked up, and he's facing that consequence with great courage and great, determination. And people can't afford, young people in particular, young people are idealistic. What's happened here, Gerry, over time is that the idealism of the young has been corrupted by woke, by cynical implementation of woke agendas, which have attracted them, LGBT and so on, abortion. They're not abortion. They never say abortion. They say reproductive rights. So that's so young kids are fooled by that. But nevertheless, when they look at Enoch Burke, I think their gut feeling is this is a good man.
Oh, I would say there is a regard. My own son has just recently finished university, coming out through the university system, and they all know who he is, and B, they have a grudging regard. He's brought up something. He's raised a point with them that, even though I don't think the vast majority agree with him, and they kind of have a maybe sort of satirical view of him, But he's raised a point that I think he has got people to think about, and it's what if something in my belief system comes against this power? Is this what's going to happen to me?
Yes, exactly. I mean, when you actually stand back and break down what's been done to Enoch, it's absolutely absurd that he's in jail ultimately. And they say, "Oh, he's contempt of court." Of course, yeah. He's in jail because he refused to implement an order to say something he didn't believe to be true. Well, who wouldn't? What person of conscience wouldn't do the same thing, regardless of their faith being Catholic, Protestant, or none?
Well, we might look at the Enoch Burke situation. I look at it in a kind of a hopeful way, because when you stand back and look at it, here's a man who's been wrestling the oppression of the Irish state for 3 years, and he's still not down.
Oh, no.
And what I would say is, can you imagine if there was 100 Enoch Burkes in the country? Like, what would that country look like? What effect would that have on this country? Like, just even 100.
Yeah, well, Enoch is the answer to that question, which maybe we've all asked, maybe not out loud, but we ask of it ourselves, and maybe we quietly ask it of each other. Is there anybody left in Ireland who in any way resembles the great heroes of the past? The Corey Pierces and
no, I haven't seen them emerge anywhere.
Well, I think Enoch has pretty much.
He's a Bar Enoch, like.
Yeah, I think he has placed himself on that plinth alongside those guys, nobody else can claim that. None of us can claim that we have actually it has cost us. Our beliefs have. Well, yeah, you can say it has cost us in different ways, cancellation, blah blah, but. There's a difference in just being cancelled and still being able to operate, and spending your nights and your days behind bars because you simply said, "I don't believe that 2 and 2 is 5."
Oh, like you could argue, like it's a cease argument, but you could argue that, like, you might make a great argument, but people that fought in the 1916 rising, that ended, the ones that ended up in jail didn't, and were released then and later, didn't spend as much jail time in jail as Enoch Burke nearly. Do you know what I mean?
Well, yeah, apart from the ones that got arrested. Yeah.
Apart from the the executed class were taken out, but
that's right.
The other the other participants, like Enoch Burke, is, in terms of jail time, is up there with any people from the past.
Well, my feeling about Enoch is, if the same thing happened again in the same way as it did in 1916, Enoch would be in there.
100%.
And it's that kind of man we need, the man of that age, man of that kind of intelligence and education in the real sense, without the, he's an educated man. He's an educated man. And he's somebody who people should be looking, regardless of their age, looking to as a leader. And I think he is. And we won't find much better if
no. It brings an interesting, maybe kind of segue into Maria Steen again, because I felt, I don't know whether you felt, that what the state, what the Combine were terrified of was a 4-week or 3 or 4 week pro-life debate.
Yes, maybe.
And I just wanted to get to your feelings on specifically what they were afraid of with Maria Steen, because my own view is she's an establishment character. She would have been a safe pair of hands in some of the some of the other things.
I don't know, Jerry. I don't know if that's what they were afraid of. I don't know if it even was going to happen or could happen. I don't know. I think we've kind of moved beyond that in a certain sense, wrongly, I think, but we have. I think what they were afraid of was this, that people look at me, or Irish people look at Maria Steen, and regardless of where they stand on the issue she speaks about in very strong terms, like abortion, they look at her and listen to her, and most of them cannot avoid the fact that this is a highly intelligent, extraordinarily likable, very attractive woman who would do us proud in any context that you can imagine. And I would add my voice to that with this caveat: in peacetime. In peacetime. In other words, if all the situation in Ireland, if we were talking about 2004 and as the conditions of 2004 had pertained and continued, I would say she would be an ideal president. However, the one caveat I have to enter here is that in the last 5.5 years, she has been silent on the issues which really were most important and significant for the state of this country and its culture and its people's well-being. And I mean, there in particular the COVID episode and also the mass migration. And in fact, her position on the mass migration issue seems to be absolutely absurd, where she said recently in reply to a question that anybody who came to Ireland was essentially automatically Irish.
Well, you see, this is where I say she's an establishment character. Like, she comes from an establishment environment, with like, so that I would have liked to have seen. The only reason I would have any interest in her running was to maybe talk on the pro-life stuff, and it would have been also interesting to hear her talking about the Enoch Burke situation.
But Gerry,
in that environment.
Yeah, okay, of course. But if you go back, Gerry, I mean, like, that battle was lost. And it was lost in ways really that had, in my view, to do with not being fought correctly. Because that referendum should never have happened. There was no right of the Irish people to vote on that issue, any more than they had the right to vote on the question of whether, all brown-eyed people should be put down immediately. That would not be an issue which should be put before the people. But nor should the right of the child in the womb have been put before the people. That right did not come from the people. It was not given by the people. It was not raised up in the Constitution. It was simply noted in the Constitution as an inalienable, imprescriptible right of every human being not to be killed at any time. And being in your mother's womb is no different. And that's for that reason. And that argument I would put that argument in the campaign. Nobody else did that I heard. That was the issue, that the entire thing should have been stopped. And in my view, I actually spent in that time, Gerry, quite a lot of time trying to persuade lawyers to take a case to stop the referendum. I couldn't find any lawyers. Now, I didn't go to Maria Steen. I don't know if she was qualified at the time, but she is a lawyer. And it seems to me that there are lots of things that qualified lawyers could have been doing in the last 2 years that they weren't doing. And I want to know why.
Well, there doesn't seem to be a William Binchy type character in the modern era out of that bubble of intellectualism, if you like.
Yes, because Maria Steen and her husband are both lawyers. And it seems to me that a family like that would have enormous capacity to be useful.
Well, he's a senior counsel. The husband's a senior counsel, so he's one of the elite.
Well, they have chosen. I'll tell you this, Gerry, and I know it particularly. They have chosen not to be involved in anything like that, and I would like to know why. Given their position in the political arena on that, why will they not take that position professionally as lawyers?
Yeah, it's a good question. I suppose, John, we're running at an hour and 10 as usual. The time flies by. We might wrap it up there. If anyone's with us to the end, just like, subscribe, and share the video. And thanks for joining us.